The following program is presented by the Far East Broadcasting Company because stories of people living out the gospel with their lives inspire all of us. FEBC, taking Christ to the world through radio and new media. Learn more at febctoday.org.
He suffered the loss of the people he loves most. He's lost his teeth. He's lost his health. And yet the love of life, the rejoicing of his heart over the miracle of life in the world is simply spectacular.
Historian David McCullough is back this week talking about the life and faith of John Adams, the second President of the United States. Hello and welcome to First Person. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Last week we heard part one of a conversation with Mr. McCullough that took place on Moody Radio in 2001. If you missed us last time, part one is available online at firstpersoninterview.com or by using a podcast app like First Person Interview, available free in your app store. And now we're about to hear the second half of that interview as we delve deeper into what made John Adams such a unique man of faith. As always, thanks to the Far East Broadcasting Company for making these programs possible. Please take a moment to learn more about FEBC by visiting our website, firstpersoninterview.com. There you'll be able to sign up for an online devotional with stories of God reaching listeners with His Word through the broadcasts of FEBC. Again, go to firstpersoninterview.com. Well, let's pick up where we left off last week in talking with Pulitzer Prize-winning author and historian David McCullough. I asked what prompted him to write the biography of John Adams.
I started out to do a dual biography, a kind of parable about the intertwining lives of two very different men, Jefferson and John Adams, who, as you know, started out friends, became enemies, and wound up friends again, and then incredibly died on the same day, and the day was July 4, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
That's one of those facts of history that's just too coincidental. Yeah.
And I thought that probably there might be a problem with Adams up against Jefferson, that Jefferson, with his aura, his fame, his importance and flair, would so outshine short, stout John Adams that I couldn't maintain any kind of balance. But a friend of mine, Richard Ketchum, who's a very good 18th century scholar and writer, said, "Don't worry. That's the least of your worries." And how right he was, because I was not very far into the project, and I realized suddenly something just said to me, and I just do this book about Adams. And I've never, ever regretted the decision, and it's been, I think, as fulfilling and as fascinating a project as any in my writing career.
Well, we are certainly the richer for that. Why do you think that Adams then has been overshadowed by so many others, including Jefferson? But he's almost forgotten. I mean, most of us, if pressed, could say that he was the second president of the U.S.
Yes, that's probably what I would have said. I would have said, well, he's the second president. He was a fat fellow with a rather short, round face and Boston blue blood, rich Boston blue blood. Of course, he was none of that. He wasn't rich. He wasn't a Bostonian, and he wasn't a blue blood.
He's a farmer who loved the land.
He was a farmer. They often say that Andrew Jackson was the first president of the people. That's quite wrong. John Adams was the first president of the people. And I quickly found that while it's true that, as has been said again and again, that Adams was abrasive, often tactless, often very vain, stubborn, independent, quick to anger, that's all quite true. But there was much, much more to him. He was also deeply learned. He was affectionate. He was passionate. He was passionate about learning, about friends, about religion, about devotion to his duty, to his country. He was funny. He had a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor.
Can you give an example of that you came across that made you smile?
Well, his account of what they called the matrimonial stories that were told at weddings among the men, and he records one about the wife of a man named B. Bicknell, which I could only read aloud, and we haven't time, but it's hilarious. His account of trying to go to sleep with Ben Franklin in the same bed one night.
There's a great trivia question there. What two founding fathers ended up at the same inn in the same bed one night? And
they are arguing over whether the window should be open or closed. It's hilarious. And we only know about it because Adams wrote it down. His wife. You really can't understand him without understanding her, and you can't understand her without understanding him. The fact that any woman of her quality, that she was his wife, that she agreed to marry him, that she was so devoted to him all of their life. You know, when she used to say, "When he's wounded, I bleed." That, if we're known by the company we keep, he kept some superb company.
He chose well.
Yes, and that goes for his friends Jefferson, his friend, and Rush also. I don't think we can overestimate how important friendship was to Adams, and the lengths to which he was willing to go to maintain friendship and to be loyal to his friends.
That's an interesting point, because several times reading the book, I felt like it was going to go a certain direction. Certainly Adams here would cast that man aside because of just the vitriolic way that they treated him. But he wouldn't do that.
And while he was quick to anger, he was also quick to forgive. And he, the only one that I don't think he ever forgave, and understandably, was Hamilton. But you asked about incidents or whatever that would particularly delighted me. I think probably up at the head of the list, if not first, would be the fact that when a printer, a publisher in Philadelphia, who had been attacking Adams at every chance when Adams was vice president, when that print shop caught on fire, Adams was right there in the middle of the night to help hand up buckets of water to put the fire out.
Buckets of water to
as
his enemy.
Vice President of the United States. Yeah. And then later when he's president and he's in the White House and the Treasury catches fire, he looks out the window and says, "My goodness, the Treasury's on fire." He's out the door like a shot, again joining the bucket brigade, President of the United States.
You wouldn't see that happening today.
No, but I also think it's a wonderful metaphor for him, because that's what he's trying to do again and again: put out the fires of war, put out the fires of anger between friends. Now, often the fires had been started by him, but there would come a point where he'd say, "All right, we've got to patch this up and put out the fire."
Well, we are certainly not going to do justice to the entire life of John Adams here with the few minutes we have, and there's so many questions I do have for you, but let's talk about this relationship with Thomas Jefferson some more. We touched on it earlier.
Well, Jefferson and Adams could not have been more contrasting. It wasn't just that one was tall and handsome and the other was short and stout. They came from two vastly different parts of the country, really two different worlds. The New England of John Adams' time and the Virginia planter's life of Jefferson's time were as different as night and day, different as France and Germany today, let's say. Adams was a freeholder, owned his own land, worked his own land, chopped his own firewood, pruned his own trees. He was still out there swinging a scythe, cutting his own hay when he was in his 80s. Jefferson, of course, lived by the labor of 200 slaves. It wasn't just that they worked his fields, they waited on him hand and foot his entire life. He never knew any other life. His first memory, Jefferson's first memory, was of being carried on a pillow by a slave. And in a way, that's, again, emblematic of his whole life. He's going to be carried by slaves. Adams, by contrast, is the only founding father who never owned a slave. Founding fathers north and south, because I'm including Franklin, I'm including John Hancock.
It wasn't just a pragmatic issue with him.
And it was a matter of principle, back to what you said at the very beginning. He sees that this issue of slavery may lead to the destruction of the country. He imagines armies marching in the sky.
Another prophetic vision, almost.
Absolutely,
just incredible of how history played itself out after
Jefferson preached the philosophy that one ought to try and go through life with the least pain possible.
So he was very non-confrontational.
Adams said, you can't do that. Pain is part of life. You have to embrace pain. You have to expect it. And in fact, very often the things that are most worthy are going to come with a measure of pain. That, I suppose, is somewhat Puritan of him. And where, as you say, where Jefferson would withdraw from conflict or confrontation, particularly personal confrontation on the floor of the House, let's say.
He wouldn't argue.
Adams was the first on his feet, and he couldn't understand somebody who wouldn't stand up for what he believed. But all these striking differences aside, what they had in common was more important. Devotion to the country, devotion to serving the country, sacrificing their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, if need be. Those weren't just, that wasn't just words.
Yeah. And that started in Philadelphia.
Their love of books, their belief in education. Adams said it shall be the duty of the government of Massachusetts to educate everybody, because it's essential to have an educated population if you're going to maintain self-government. Jefferson said any nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never can be. They're very alike in that. They are fellow scholars. Yes. They are colleagues, if you will.
Very educated men.
Very educated men, and devoted. Each is devoted to his family. Each is devoted to his part of America, and they were both long-lived. Adams lived longer than Jefferson. There was 8 years difference in their age. Adams lived longer than any president in our history. They also suffered greatly. They suffered terrible losses of children, wives. They knew defeat. They knew humiliation in the press. And I think, by and large, they both genuinely loved the other. Each loved the other.
We'll continue talking with David McCullough about John and Abigail Adams coming up on First Person.
When I first heard that good news on the FEBC station, I tried praying to Jesus for the first time. Life is difficult, but Christ is helping me see things differently.
Just one of millions of grateful people who listens to the Far East Broadcasting Company in her own language. You can sign up for a free online daily devotional from FEBC, telling more listener stories, while at the same time it encourages you from God's Word. Receive this online devotional without obligation when you visit firstpersoninterview.com. Now back to our interview with David McCullough, the author of many books, including a book on the life of John Adams. This relationship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson was a complex one. I don't think I understood really how complex until I read this book that you've so ably written. Both men found themselves in the service of their young country at war with Britain. They found themselves in France, along with Benjamin Franklin. Pick up the story there.
Well, Adams had gone over to assist Franklin in his efforts to get more support from the French. He also went up to Holland, or the Netherlands, where on his own he succeeded against tremendous odds in bringing the Dutch in as financial backers of the revolution and then the new nation.
Which was really critically important.
Critical. It's one of the most important contributions of his entire career, sadly, shamefully forgotten. It was as important as some of the battles of the Revolution were in establishing the outcome.
And that's where you followed in his footsteps to go to Amsterdam.
And he nearly died in Amsterdam. Contracted a fever there and very nearly died. And
separated from his wife.
And then nobody knew him, and people were shunning him, and it was hard. It was an uphill struggle. But after the war was over, when Jefferson then came over to replace Franklin as the minister to France, and Adams became our ambassador to Great Britain. And it was during this period, and particularly in the period just before Adams left Paris to go to London to be representatives at the court of St. James's, that the Adams and the Jeffersons saw each other all the time. Jefferson was there with his daughter. Adams had both his wife and his daughter, as well as his son John Quincy. They were in and out of each other's houses all the time. Jefferson became, as they all later said, a kind of second father to John Quincy Adams. It was a very close friendship of the kind that often happens to Americans when they find themselves abroad or living in a foreign country. Very understandable. Jefferson far preferred Adams' company to the French that he knew in Paris. And when the Adams went to London, Jefferson came over and was with them several months. And after being with them several months, came back to Paris, wrote a letter to Madison and said, if you knew this man, you'd love him. But when they came home to take part in the new administration for the new nation, the George Washington administration, Adams as the first vice president, Jefferson as the first secretary of state, they found themselves on the opposite sides of the rising two-party system. They became political rivals.
Very bitter battles.
And they became political enemies, which was painful to both of them. And, of course, they ran against each other twice. And the first time Adams defeated Jefferson, the second time Jefferson defeated Adams very narrowly. And so when Adams was defeated and he goes home in humiliation, he's been rejected by his country, and this man who used to be his friend, who he later then finds out has betrayed him
and financed those who betrayed him,
by paying a fellow to smear him in the papers, and to Jefferson's great credit. To Adams' great credit, he forgives Jefferson that, but Abigail never really did.
Even though Abigail and Thomas Jefferson corresponded
and had been very close friends, and had a kind of a wonderful banter, lively back and forthing about music and ideas and buying furniture and clothing and so forth. And as Abigail says, there will always be a corner of my heart that belongs to you.
Yes,
but she said my respect for you has gone.
That's a very powerful letter. I remember that very clearly. Yes. And anyone who has felt betrayed by a friend will identify with the feelings there.
And she's writing it to the President of the United States.
Yes,
he's in the White House then.
One of the illustrations of the enmity between the two of them is, I believe I have this correct, that when Adams was president and Jefferson was vice president, they went up to a year without speaking to each other?
Oh, they didn't speak to each other for 11 years altogether.
Oh, my goodness.
No correspondence, no talk between them.
Huh. But that changed.
After
both left office?
Brought about, encouraged by their mutual friend Benjamin Rush, Dr. Benjamin Rush of Philadelphia. And it's Adams who takes the first step. He writes a letter to Jefferson. And Jefferson responds immediately. He's just as eager to restore the friendship as Adams was. And they then commence a correspondence like none other. It's one of the great exchanges of letters in American history. It's one of the great exchanges of letters in the English language.
How did you feel when you read those letters back and forth?
Oh, my goodness. You're humbled. You feel like you're about 4 feet tall or 3 feet tall. I mean, imagine two former presidents of the United States discussing in their correspondence the correct pronunciation of certain Greek phrases. Inconceivable. The range of their reading, the range of their knowledge. And, of course, again and again they come back to the subject of the American Revolution. That was their great time. And about getting old, about death, about families. They're two old pals.
Let me ask this, though. What did Adams obviously knew about Jefferson and the Sally Heming relationship, the children that Jefferson fathered apparently by Sally Heming. What did Adams think of all that?
Well, the whole country knew. And, of course, he could have gloated. Here's this man that did all these things to me behind my back. Now he's getting it, and too bad, He could have been bitter. He could have gloated. He could have
used it.
But he didn't. He didn't. He never said anything. He's never said anything about it at all publicly, nor did she. But privately, he wrote one letter to a friend in which he said, and again, I can't quote it exactly, but in essence he said, and I think this is so wonderful, it's so right. He said, there stories like this about slave masters and their slave women have always been told and always will be told, because such a story is a metaphor for the infinitely larger sin of slavery itself.
Wow. That says it. That's remarkable. Well, we are growing short on time. There's so much I wanted to talk to you about. I wish we could have talked about his relationship to his children as a father. He's a wonderful father.
He was a superb father.
His children, some of them failed later in life.
Yes.
Charles
broke
died
his heart
of alcoholism and broken man.
Yep.
His wife, Nabby, who was so
his
dear.
Daughter, Nabby.
I'm sorry, his daughter, Nabby, who was so dear to him and Abigail. Passed away as a young mother.
Horrible death from mastectomy, and one can hardly imagine what that must have been like in the days before.
His son, John Quincy, became president of the United States. First time that had happened until recently.
That's right.
Father.
And when they came to him to say how pleased they were, his friends and neighbors, and to congratulate him, they would invariably say, "Isn't it wonderful that he had the encouragement and the guidance of you as his father?" And Adams would always say, "You must remember he had a mother, too."
Yes. Matter of fact, I used that line myself earlier today. It was so powerful. In all the interviews that you've done about this book, and there have been a number of them, is there something that's been generally overlooked?
Yes, exactly what you've been talking about, the role of his religious faith, the role of religion in their lives, both private and public. You see, to me, the end of the book is in many ways truly the culmination, because it's the end of the book is about when he comes home after the presidency. For 25 years, he never goes anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then you begin the inward journey. Mm-hmm. And he says, taking up the lines of St. Paul, I promise to rejoice evermore if I can.
I was so moved by that.
And it's the if I can.
Yeah.
And truly at the end, he suffered everything. He suffered the loss of the people he loves most. He's lost his teeth. He's lost his health. And yet the love of life, the rejoicing of his heart over the miracle of life in the world is simply spectacular. And what he writes, where that paragraph that I used, I hope you remember, where he talks about, he even finds a thrill in commas and periods, and it takes him in, and he says he wants to get down on his knees and thank God for this marvelous, this magnificent whole, I think he calls it.
In the last page of your book, you say this: he had reduced his motto, his fundamental creed, to a single sentence: "He who loves the workman and his work and does what he can to preserve and improve it shall be accepted of him." Very powerful.
Indeed.
Very powerful. David McCullough, thank you so much.
Mr. Shepherd, I thank you very much.
Now, we got just a few seconds left. Abigail preceded him in death.
Yes, she died in 1818, 8 years before he did. He died in 1826.
There must have been a terrible separation for him.
Well, you know it was, but he told his son that we have been separated longer than I expect to be separated from her now.
Another indication of that faith.
Yes.
Yeah. I love reading biographies of great people, and the book John Adams by David McCullough is certainly one of my favorites. It was published back around 2001 when this interview was recorded, but it continues to hold great and timeless lessons for us today. My thanks to a very gracious man, David McCullough, for his time. Someday we'll have to share the interview regarding George Washington and McCullough's book, 1776. If you'd like to listen again or pass this program recommendation along to someone else, give them the website firstpersoninterview.com, where they can listen, or find our podcast on iTunes or almost any podcast app. And once again, thanks to the Far East Broadcasting Company for their support of First Person. Please support FEBC in the mission of taking Christ to the world through radio and new media. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us again for First Person.